Revelation is one of those books, it seems like there's a lot of people on the television and stuff, a lot of people who have books. This is the way to see this book, and everybody has got it figured out. But yet, if you're anything like me, when you open it up, it seems like it's all just going over your head. It's probably one of the more difficult books to study. And so we will be starting on a study of Revelation. We'll be doing it every Wednesday until we're done with the book, however long that takes. And this study is going to be a section-by-section study, not a verse-by-verse study. So we're not going to get, real into the nitty-gritty and spend, weeks on just one or two verses. And the reason for that is because we're keeping it surface on purpose to make things easier for you to understand. We don't want this study to be so confusing it doesn't actually help you with understanding the book of Revelation. That wouldn't get us anywhere. So I broke this first section here down into just a series of answers and questions, and hopefully it'll set the groundwork for understanding the book itself. So who wrote Revelation? Well, it was written by John, one of the 12 disciples. This is the same John that wrote the Gospel of John, the same John that wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Same guy. Now, there was some disagreement as far as in the 300s AD about who actually wrote the book, but there really has been no real good possible competitors for who else could have done it. So we're left with, it was John. John did it. Okay, besides that, John is the only of the disciples who died a natural death. They tried. He didn't die naturally because of his own fault. I mean, they tried boiling the guy. They tried poisoning him. They exiled him. They tried all kinds of different stuff, but he just kept kicking. And there's actually a theory in the early church that many people thought that John wouldn't die. In fact, the gospel gives references at the very end. Jesus is talking to Peter, and Peter asked Jesus about John. And Jesus says, "What does it matter to you? If I want him to stay alive until I come back, what's that to you?" And then there's an editor's note after that line where whoever was, editing the Gospel of John, they say, he didn't say that John would never die. He just said, what is it to you if I did want to keep him alive? So, it's just kind of funny there. As far as John as a person, he was a very well-known leader of the church, a very important part of the church. It's said that he died in Ephesus, where he was taking care of Jesus' mother. He functioned as a leader, an overseer, a bishop, whatever you want to say there, a pastor, a leader over leaders, whatever. And you call it whatever you want to. He was a big leader there. Any questions on that? Okay. Next question, when was the book of Revelation written? Well, the book of Revelation doesn't just appear as the last book in your Bible. It actually was written as the last book of the Bible. It was written in the 90s AD. This is most of the people that started the church at this point, were dead. Most of them not through pleasant means, like Paul and Peter. But so this was during the reign, to give you some historical setting, it's during the reign of Emperor Domitian. And Emperor Domitian had a very short but very intense persecution of the Christians. Probably lasted about 2 or 3 years, somewhere around there. But it was very intense. It was so intense that actually a lot of the church thought it was the Great Tribulation. So anyways, moving on from there. Any questions about that? Okay. Want to make sure I don't fly through these things too fast. Where was it written from? It was written from an island called Patmos, which is in between Turkey and Greece. I'll show it to you on a map here. Actually, I'll just show it to you right now. Here you can see on the right, that yellow bit there is Asia Minor, which today is called Turkey. And on the left side, that green part there is Greece, which is today called Greece. And that little red dot in between is Patmos. It's a little hard to see, but it's about right in the middle, just slightly under halfway down. And you can see there on the right, you can see the different churches of Revelation. So I hope that kind of helps you get the idea. Now, tradition says that John got this revelation in a cave called the Cave of the Apocalypse. And you might say, oh, that's awful fortuitous. It was called the Cave of the Apocalypse afterwards, not before. But yeah, so we don't know that this is where he got it. Okay, we don't even know if he got it in one sitting or not. It's just that this is where tradition puts it. Any question on that? Okay. That takes us to who in the world was this book written to? Well, it was written to a series of churches in Asia Minor, also called Asia, also called Anatolia. Bithynia, Cappadocia, and Galatia were sections of Asia that Rome had. That's what they called the different sections of Turkey. But you could just say Turkey, and then you just be done with it. As far as on a map, just in case, because I know sometimes people aren't real good about geography, don't worry too much. I sometimes have a bit of a hard time too. So this is a map of Europe. On the left-hand side, the purple, you can see there is Spain. If you go north of that, you can see France and England. Then the blue is Germany. And then underneath the blue is more purple. There's Italy and there's Greece, all that in there, okay? So the churches here, the churches of Revelation, are in that purple section to the farthest right section. This is Turkey there, and you can see right there. So Syria is right above Israel. So it's sandwiched in between Syria and Greece. That's the area where the 7 churches were at. Any questions on that? And go ahead, Spencer. Yeah, all the churches are in modern day Turkey. In total, I have no idea. No idea. I know that there were the 7 churches of Revelation that are there, but now I have no idea. But interesting though, although I don't know how many churches are there now, I do know that I believe. I should have written it down. I believe most of the churches of Revelation are actually gone now because the cities are not really a thing anymore. Let me double check on that though, but I'm pretty sure that's true. But as far as modern day churches, I have no idea. Danny? That's the place we do not speak of. The cold, cold Northlands. That's where the Nordic people are from. Okay, any other questions? All right, so let's go on to the next part here. Where did the book get its name? Well, so the first word of the book of Revelation in Greek is apocalypsis, which is where we get our word apocalypse. And it basically means something that is revealed or a revelation of something. So in the case of this book, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. So with that being said, that's where it gets its name from there. Any questions on that? Okay. Next up is, and we'll have all this posted online in case I'm going too fast. You know what, let me give you another minute there, Skip. You just tell me whenever you're done. And we'll have all this posted online, so if you missed anything, you can always replay it. Did you get it, Skip? You good? Okay. What type of a book is it, or as far as that is, what genre is it? Well, the book of Revelation is actually 3 different genres of books. The first is, surprise, surprise, called apocalyptic literature. So the book of Revelation is the only book of the Bible that is almost entirely apocalyptic. But the Old Testament has different books that have parts of apocalyptic literature. So in the book of Isaiah, for instance, there is what's called the Little Apocalypse. And this is probably around chapters like 24 through like 28 or 9. Probably somewhere around there. And it's called the Little Apocalypse because those chapters almost exclusively deal with the end times. Ezekiel has a part near the end of it that deals with the end time. That section is apocalyptic. The book of Daniel, the latter half of it, talks about, once again, apocalyptic literature. And then the book of Zechariah, the last couple chapters are apocalyptic. So whereas the Old Testament had quite a few sections that were apocalyptic, the book of Revelation is really the only book that is almost entirely apocalyptic. So what are some factors about apocalyptic literature? Well, apocalyptic literature is real big in symbolism. Symbolism. That basically means that things in apocalyptic literature should not be taken as literal all the time. They're symbolic, okay? So we see that in the book of Revelation with things like there's a dragon in the book. Now, there aren't actual dragons, and we don't have to actually find dragon bones to say that the book of Revelation is true. we can just know that it's standing in for something. It's symbolism. A second thing about apocalyptic literature is that they have where they will draw out historical events from either the past, present, or near future, and show it how it leads to God's intervention. And the third thing is the way that there's a big emphasis on evil's eventual demise. Everything's gearing up, and these historical things I'm going to pull out, and then it's going to look real bad, and then good's going to win in the end. So you can see Revelation has all those things. But going back to the thing that I was saying about symbolism, one area that we see symbolism in the book of Revelation is in numbers. So whenever it has either the number 7 or multiples of the number 7, that almost always stands for completeness. Whenever you have the number 12, that's almost always going to show as God's people as a whole. You know, numbers are symbolic, things are symbolic. Let me come back to that. But the biblical apocalyptic, though, differs very widely from the ancient apocalyptic literature from the ancient world that's not Christian. In those writings, normally you don't know who the author is. So it's, what's it called? Pseudonymous? What's the word that I'm looking for? What? Not anonymous. It's where it's written. So it's like pseudepigraphal, but not where necessarily the person is different, but it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying. Where you don't know who the writer is. Also, another thing about the ancient world's apocalyptic literature is they had something that was called prophecy after the fact. They had a big word for it, but don't worry, I won't waste your time on it. The idea here is that if something would happen and they'd write a prophecy that was about it, but it would actually be given after the fact. Whereas in the book of Revelation, we don't have that either. Moving on from there, when you're reading the book of Revelation, the safest bet is go to the book assuming that everything is a metaphor, unless it specifies that it's not. Now, see, this is exactly the opposite of what you want to do with the entire rest of the Bible. Anywhere else in the Bible, assume it's literal unless, there's clues that it's a metaphor or a parable or whatever else. But Revelation is the exact opposite. You just assume the thing's a metaphor unless it specifies that it's not. And we'll get to a real big reason for that in just a minute. But the second genre that the book of Revelation is prophecy, which I think surprises no one. Well, I'll go ahead and mention that here. The book of Revelation actually cites very heavily of the Old Testament prophets, so I'll try to bring those out to light whenever we hit them. But prophecy has two main factors to it. The first is foretelling. This is telling the future. This is the one that everybody thinks of when you think of prophecy. This is a coming event. In 2 years, such and such is going to happen. There's going to be a famine in this place in 4 or 5 years. Okay, all right. But then the second part of prophecy is called forthtelling. This is where the prophet will give clarity on a current reality. So like, for instance, let's say, Melissa, you've hidden it from the Lord, but you stole some money from him. That would be prophetic because I'm saying something that has been hidden that God is bringing to light. It's not necessarily about the future. It's about a current reality. And so when you read the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, for instance, it's largely prophetic in that it's pointing out the evil of the different leaders. Moving on from there, the third genre of the book of Revelation is letter or epistle, whatever you want to call it there. If you ever see epistle written somewhere, that just means letter. It's a big fancy word, means the same thing. And what that means, though, since the book of Revelation is a letter, you have to remember that means the meaning of the book has to be something that the original audience would have grasped. It was not written to a Christian church in 2026. It was written to a Christian church in 90 AD. So because of that, you have to remember it was written for a reason to a certain people. So there's a people, a place, a time that they would have had to grasp the meaning. So you remember, we're not the center of attention here. So any what do you say? Application you get has to be something that they would have understood it to mean back then. And this takes me to the point I was kind of talking about. Is it's very important that we don't insert the modern analysis into an ancient book. It applies to the world, to our lives today, absolutely. But you have to remember that it was written then to them. So it's not for modern audiences with America as the center player. What we do, because we're American, is when we're reading apocalyptic literature, we assume that we are the center. We put everything in light of America being the center of the world. Well, that wasn't a factor for them. In fact, they weren't even in Israel. They were in Turkey. So once again, you have to look at it from their perspective, how they would have understood it, and realize that it was a letter written to specific people for a specific place and a specific time. Any questions on this before we go to the next part? No? Okay, I want to make sure we don't, go too fast on any of this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Say it. Yes. That is actually, I think, the next one. Yes, right there. That is actually the very next one. You're meeting me on the middle here, Skip. Why was the book of Revelation, why was it written? Because if you grew up in the church like I did, you probably heard it used for all kinds of things. I mean, either to scare people into repenting or tell them they're going to hell or something. It was written for some kind of a scare tactic. But why was this book actually written, or this letter actually written? The first reason was to give hope for the church. Remember, this is during a time of intense persecution under Emperor Domitian. And he was writing this letter for the primary purpose of encouraging them and giving them hope in this very dark time, and to show them that God is still in control throughout the ages. No matter what you're going through, God's still in control. All this stuff seems like maybe God's not hearing you, maybe God's out of control. No, he's not. God's still your hope. God's still got it covered throughout the ages. And as you read through the book of Revelation, you'll see the way that one of the big factors is God being behind all the different things. So even the parts where it seems like Satan is doing something and he really thinks he's got the upper hand, it's God that's behind it and in control of it. So two things I want to say before I go further into this. The first off, remember as you're reading Revelation, it was not written for the world, it was written for the church. I'm always a little questioning when I hear people try to use the book of Revelation for the world to either scare them or whatever, because it was written to the church. This is something for us, for our benefit. There are books, absolutely, that are for sinners and saints, absolutely, but Revelation is just really not it. It says very, very clearly from the get-go. It's also not a book that's meant to scare you, so if you're reading the book of Revelation and you're scared, this is not a good thing. This is either because you've been trained from an early age to be afraid, or maybe it's something in your life that needs to change. I don't really know, but that's not the reaction you're supposed to have from the book of Revelation. Furthermore from that, we see in the book of Revelation that the hiccups that you see in your life they still work into his plan. But there's another aspect of the book of Revelation, and that's that it is also warning. It's hope, but it's also warning. Especially we're going to see this. So remember how I said that there's a lot of symbolism. One of the ways that we see symbolism almost right out of the get-go is it opens up talking about 7 churches, and it says 7 spirits of God. So are there only 7 churches? Are there only 7 spirits of God? Well, of course not. But rather, those 7 are symbolic of the whole. So by writing to these 7 churches, the letter applies to all the church. It kind of makes sense? And so with that, he's going to say some things to the church that are going to be encouraging for some and warning for others. We're going to see when we get to the letters, he's going to tell some churches, I do not praise you in this, you did not do a good job in this. But then other churches, he's going to say, I praise you in this, you did a good job in this. Not all 7 churches does he have something harsh to say. Some of them he does, but some of them he has something good to say. So it's hope and warning. And it really sets a tone for the rest of the book. Especially keep in mind that the very first thing, before we even get to the letters that go to the churches, is the showing God's glory. So that's kind of setting up the whole tone for the book. Everything that you read for the rest of the book, see it in light of God's glory. So any questions on that before we go to the next part? Okay. Next question. So is it Scripture? Here's the thing. This has been heavily debated for years, and I'm going to try to make this a very simple thing because there are literally huge books written about this, and I don't want to waste your time on all that. But I'm going to try to do this because some people, even nowadays, still do not see the book of Revelation as Scripture. Some people, even nowadays, will go to the book and they'll say, well, that's like, it's less inspired. There's, this one's more inspired, but Revelation just doesn't really seem like it fits. I know I've talked to a few people from that have said that. And even before the great East and West church split in 1054 AD, the Eastern church was still not totally sold on the book of Revelation until about the 600s AD. Before that, the Western church, they took hold of it pretty early on, but the Eastern church was just kind of slow to accept it. And part of the reason for that was because they had a problem with how it was seen and how it was interpreted. And so it took a while for them to kind of accept it. A great example of that is a group called the Montanists. Think of them basically as ancient charismatics. They believed three things that were very troublesome. This isn't the only things that they believed that was troublesome, but three of them. First off, they saw the new prophecies from the Holy Spirit as trumping the revelation of the Bible. So their new revelation that they got supposedly through the gift of prophecy was more trustworthy or to be believed more so than the Bible was. That's the first big problem. The second big problem is they believed very strictly in what was called asceticism. This, once again, another big fancy word that basically means the monk life. Breaking yourself away from other people, living, I have to be holy from the world and set apart. Basically like the purity culture that was real big in the early 2000s. Real basic, real similar in that. And then the third thing was they believed in the imminent second coming of Christ. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, we all believe in the imminent second coming. No. I don't mean Jesus could come any minute. I mean, Jesus will come in a year or two. You know what I mean? There's a difference between Jesus could come at any time versus, no, he is coming later this year. And it's like, well, he didn't say that he was coming later this year, so, and they had a really big problem with that. They were kind of overplaying. A great example of this is actually some of the publicized things you've seen lately where they say, I have this revelation that Jesus is coming back on such and such a date, and then that date comes and goes, and Jesus still isn't here. Like that guy that came out of Africa, I think it was last year, and he kept giving different pronouncements of when Jesus was going to return. Great examples of that. There's no way we could know that. So, the fact that Revelation was accepted by these people was kind of a stink to some of the rest of the church. They're like, well, if these psychos are going to read this book, we're not going to read it. But so that might give you the wrong idea, and you might say, so hold on. Nobody even believed in the book of Revelation being scripture? Well, no. Now let's kind of back up. Approximately the mid-hundreds AD, Justin Martyr was talking about it being scripture. And there were some others as well in about 180 or so. And then Eusebius, writing in 330 AD, talks about the way that some accepted it and some didn't. So you can see that it was a book of contention, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it should just be kind of dismissed, you know what I mean? But going back to the thing about if a heretic uses a book, that doesn't mean that it's not, that doesn't condemn the book. That doesn't mean the book's not trustworthy. That just means the heretic uses it. A great example of this, we looked at cults last year, and we were looking at the cult of Jehovah's Witness, and they use the King James Version of the Bible. So does that mean we shouldn't read the Bible because the cultists use it? So I hope you see what I'm talking about here. A heretic using a book doesn't automatically say you shouldn't read that book. And then also, when we talk about the council deciding what books went in the Bible, that's very misleading. That's extremely misleading. The council didn't just decide what books to put in the Bible. They more of just agreed with what was already happening. They had three factors. The first one was they acknowledged books that were written by the apostles or people who were close to the apostles. That's something you can't just make up. The second thing is they agreed with books that were orthodox. In other words, books that already taught the truth. So they weren't agreeing with Gnostic books that were just kind of getting off the deep end. The third thing was widespread acceptance. Books that were already widely accepted in the church. So all three of those factors are pretty objective. The only subjective thing that they did is they would say, does this book appear to be inspired by God? That's the only subjective test. All the other tests were objective, and like I say, these were books that were already accepted. So yes, the book of Revelation was not completely accepted in the whole of the church, but it was still widespread, and there's no reason for us to doubt that it was actually written by John the disciple, and there's nothing in there that should make us have any doubt as to whether it's orthodox or not. And once again, it heavily cites established scripture. So if you want to throw out the book of Revelation, you got to throw out about half of the prophets in the Old Testament too. I mean, it's you're kind of walking on thin ice there. So is it Scripture? Most likely, yes. That's the short answer there. Most of the evidence leans towards it being yes. Obviously, you can always twist something, but, So any questions on that? Okay. So now I guess let's get to some general issues with prophecy. The first general issue with prophecy is sometimes people will read a word of prophecy and part of it will come true and the other part won't. We've actually seen this in the book of Revelation time and time again throughout history. So that makes us think, oh, so then it was wrong, or was it fake, or what? Well, here's the thing about prophecy. Prophecy is a lot like a mountain range. And in that respect, it'll have multiple fulfillments and parts that are separated by years. So whereas, when you're seeing a mountain range in the distance, you'll see like maybe multiple ranges, and they'll be separated one in front of the other, and it's kind of hard to distinguish which one's closer sometimes, especially when there's fog. And I'll go to a picture in just a minute when Skip's been writing this down, that I think kind of gets the point that I'm trying to get across. But anytime you're dealing with prophecy, the grand majority of times is it doesn't happen exactly how it's written. It happens in stages and parts. So if you look at this picture right here, this kind of exactly shows what I'm talking about. You have the prophecy will not specify, but it'll say something, and it's actually talking about two different events, but it's talking about them together. So a good example of this, do you remember in the book of Isaiah where he says, you're going to have a son will be born from the virgin, and you'll name, Emmanuel and all of this? Well, that's talking about Isaiah's son that he had. His wife had a son. That was the next year. However, it's also talking about Jesus. See what I mean? There's stages to it. There's like the mountain range, there's parts that are up here and there's parts that are back here. And so just because one part of it was fulfilled, the whole entirety was not fulfilled. So whenever you're looking at a book like Revelation or whatever, don't think that it's going to be as clear, cut and dry, black and white as you have it in your head. This is exactly what the Pharisees did, and they were so surprised that Jesus was who he was. In fact, they still don't believe that he was who he was. So they did not. They didn't get that. They thought it was going to be exactly how they wanted it to be. And whenever you're looking at a book like Revelation, let's hold off on that. Whenever we're talking about a book of Revelation. A book like Revelation, you're going to see that it starts in the beginning easier to understand, and then it's going to get progressively harder to understand, okay? Well, it's easy to know what's going on when it's, hey, letters to 7 churches. Okay, and we're talking about, like, this is basically like Corinthians. We're fine. But then you get past that, and you're talking about seals and cups, and you're like, what's going on? I have no idea what's going on. And then also, the book of Revelation follows a very general thing. Keep this general. But it goes from the present into the immediate future, into the far future. So as you go into the book, it jumps further and further ahead in the timeline until you get into, the new heavens and the new earth. So with that, another thing we need to talk about, once again, we're talking about general issues in the book of Revelation. Another thing we need to talk about is a very brief discussion on millennialism. Okay, there's 3 views. I'm not going to tell you which one to choose. But these are 3 different views of where and when does Jesus reign for 1,000 years. That's the question, okay? So some people would say Jesus will reign for 1,000 years after he returns. So Jesus comes back, and then at a later time, he reigns for 1,000 years. That view is called premillennialism. The second view is called postmillennialism. Exactly how it sounds. It's the exact opposite. Jesus will reign for 1,000 years before he returns. So what does that look like? It looks like this. Mankind enters into a golden age. The church is prospering. Everything looks great. And then all of a sudden, Jesus comes back. The exact opposite, number 1, is premillennialism. That's where everything is continually getting worse and worse and worse. And then there's the rapture of the church, maybe, if you believe in the rapture. Some people don't believe in the rapture. And then after the Great Tribulation, there's the millennial reign of Christ then. So, whichever one there. But then the third view is called amillennialism. That's why it just has an A with a hyphen or whatever. Amillennialism. And this is one like the Jehovah's Witness would believe, where Jesus doesn't literally come back, or maybe he doesn't just literally have a 1,000-year reign. Instead, Jesus will reign spiritually in people's hearts, or he'll reign in heaven spiritually again, or maybe he'll reign in the new heavens and new earth, or whatever. One thing you hear a lot from people who are amillennial is they'll talk a lot about the kingdom is now. Oh, they'll talk a lot in that kind of language. And not to say that the kingdom of heaven isn't now, but that doesn't necessarily mean, is like the Jehovah's Witness would say, that literally the kingdom of heaven is here with no future kingdom. You know what I mean? Like, that's not really necessarily what we're talking about. So, okay, we got through that. Before I go to the discussion of the rapture, are there any questions of this? I know this can kind of be a little bit intimidating if you don't know about this stuff. So, and I'll tell you what the official view is of the Assemblies of God is here in just a minute, but I don't want to. I think there's warrant for all of these views. I personally think it's premillennialism, but I'm not going to die on that hill. When it happens, we'll know. I'm not going to die on this hill and make a thing where you're not saved if you're not premillennial. Like, come on. We do not have to have perfect knowledge about the end times. Go ahead, Linda. So I'll get to tribulation in just a minute. I was letting Skip write down. Were you good on that, Skip? Okay. So now we'll get to the tribulation. I'm sorry, the rapture, and that will also talk about the tribulation. So when is the rapture? This takes us to the post-trib, pre-trib, all that, mid-trib. Here, it's basically an issue of, does the rapture happen before or after the tribulation, or does it happen at all? That's the question. So some people would say, well, there is not going to be a rapture at all, and so for that, they don't go to the second question. They're out of the discussion already. If you say, yes, there is going to be a rapture, which I personally believe there is going to be a rapture, then the question is, does it happen before the tribulation, during the tribulation, or after the tribulation? And that takes us to the issue of the tribulation. So it's something I want to say. I want to make sure I don't skip this. Well, I'll just say this. My personal view, I personally believe that it will be some form of either mid-tribulation rapture or post-tribulation rapture, and I'll tell you why. I don't think that God's going to shelter us and have us have a perfect, easy existence, and then he's just going to come back when we're just outside tending to our flowers. I don't think that's going to be what happens. I think the situation is going to get more and more severe, like it was in John's day, and it's going to be kind of like a global thing. I think America's going to very much so, Christians are going to lose their favor in America. I think that it's going to get more and more persecution throughout the world. And then I think as we get to this, then the rapture will happen. I don't think we're going to be safe from that because there's too many different things in Scripture that point to us suffering. Why would God spend so much time talking about our suffering if it's not even going to happen? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But once again, I'm not going to die on that hill. Okay. Now, if you're asking the question, okay, in the Assemblies of God, what does the Assemblies of God view? What do they have? Generally speaking, Assemblies of God is premillennial, so that Jesus will return and then there'll be the millennial reign of Christ. And the second thing is they are typically pre-tribulation rapture. That I don't think they have an official position as that. It's just that most AG pastors that I know are post-tribulation rapture. They think that the rapture is going to happen before the Great Tribulation. Once again, I don't share that view. I don't think we're going to get saved from any discomfort before that happens. Any question before we go to the next bit of this? No? Okay. So there's a lot of stuff to hit here, and that's why I really wanted to focus on this for our first night. I know it's maybe a little bit dry because we're not actually in the book of Revelation yet, but very important nevertheless. So go ahead, Skip. Oh, okay. Do what? Well, I'm not too crazy about dying either, Linda. Well, this is true. Oh, okay. Well, when we go through the book, or maybe at another time, if Skip, wants to, we can talk about that. Absolutely. I don't want to corner Skip though. Okay. So then another question that comes up quite a lot whenever you're talking about the book of Revelation is one about history. So there's two main splits when people talk about the book of Revelation. The first split is this: Revelation is a historical book, so all the things already happened. Then there's a second view that Revelation is a futuristic book. None of the things have really happened. there's a lot of argument, and I'm not trying to make light of the issue, but I think, honestly, we could just say this and move on. It's kind of a little bit of both. There are things in the book of Revelation that are historical. And like I say, when we're talking about prophecy, it'll have multiple fulfillments. See what I mean? So were there times of, for instance, the dragon raging against the children of the woman? Yes. Does that mean that there won't be another time of that happening again? No. See what I mean? So in a way, it's historical. But also, I believe that all the evidence of the book seems to imply that the grand majority of the things are still talking about futuristic events, things that are yet to come. And I'm not trying to make little of the argument. I understand it's a really big discussion, but I'm just giving us the simple thing here, trying to keep it simple and short. I will say, though, who here has either watched or read any of the Left Behind stuff? Okay, so you guys know. Okay, now which one? Did you watch one with Nicolas Cage? Okay, all right. Because I wasn't a crazy fan about the Nicolas Cage one. I mean, Nicolas Cage is kind of hit or miss, but whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But I do want to give a little word of warning. Left Behind is not very good source material, okay? When we talk about Revelation, we're going to talk about the book of Revelation. We're not going to talk about the movies or the books left behind, okay? As amusing as they were, it's important that you don't form theology from that. I mean, if you grew up like me, Left Behind was basically a staple in the Christian diet. Everybody had that. You went to your grandma's house, what'd she have on the bookshelf? Left Behind. It was everywhere. And, that's fine. It's not like it's a sin to read the book or anything. I'm just saying we're not going to put the Left Behind universe above the book of Revelation. We're going to look at the book of Revelation. Okay. And the reason why I want to mention that is because a lot of times we'll read or watch something, and we'll read or watch something, and we will see it as we'll kind of let it color our opinion. Great example. Okay, instead of me tripping over my words, let me just give you a good example. When you think of in the book of Jonah, large fish eating Jonah, you probably think of the scene in Pinocchio where he's sitting in the on the boat in the whale's stomach and he's fishing. That's probably what's in your head. That's probably not how it was. There's probably a lot more cramped. But once again, the things that we watch have a way of getting into our minds. So that's why I'm giving that disclaimer. There's going to be some things maybe you grew up with that might not be accurate. So moving on from there, that takes us to the problem called dispensationalism. Okay. Okay, this is a really big discussion again, and I'm trying to make it very simple. What is dispensationalism? Dispensationalism basically believes that there are different dispensations or epochs or ages that God created throughout time. And in those times, God used different means and different people to accomplish his will. So what that looks like is there was an age of the conscience. So how were people saved? Through their conscience. Then there was the age of human government. So how were people saved? By submission to human government. Then there was the age of the promise. So how were people saved? By believing in the promise. So if you didn't hear the promise, you're just out of luck. Then there was the age of the law. So if you followed the law literally saved you. Your salvation was through adherence to the law. And people who hold dispensational believe that Jews got saved in the Old Testament period because of their obedience to the law, even though the Old Testament says it's not your obedience. So there's a lot of issues with dispensationalism that they kind of just look over. After the age of, what was I on? I was on the law. After the age of the law is the age of grace, which is the age we're under now, which now we're saved by grace, but that's going to eventually end because then there will be the dispensation of the kingdom. And so as you can see, it's a very fragmented theory. And it's not a very, very old theory either. It was created in the 1900s, okay? So if you've heard this taught, there's not a whole lot of basis for it. A man named Darby made it up in the 1900s. It doesn't have the weight of Christian history and tradition with it, okay? It's just a new invention. And with dispensationalism, there's some things that inevitably you have to believe with it. First off, you have to believe that things are always going to go from bad to worse, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter how much you witness, how much you tell people about Jesus, people will just continually not listen until the earth just catches on fire from the evil of everybody. That's it. There's no hope. Dispensationalism is not a view of hope. Whereas in the Bible, it talks about, yes, people will get saved. Things will go from bad to worse, absolutely. But people will be saved, and our actions do matter. Everything in dispensationalism is always hyper-literal. So it's absolutely, everything has to be taken literally true. And the big issues, which we'll get to in just a minute, we're left with God's people aren't always God's people. At one time it was Israel, now it's not. God's plan has not always been God's plan. Now his plan is to save us through Jesus, but that wasn't always his plan. God's ways to salvation are different. At different times he saved people through different means. So as you can see, there's numerous problems with this view. The first big problem with dispensationalism, that means Israel at a future date has to return to the animal sacrifices. That's the first big problem. If they have to return to the animal sacrifices, why did we do the whole Jesus thing? Why did we do that? The second major problem with dispensationalism, God's plan and people have no cohesion. So in other words, actually we were just talking about this today. In other words, Israel is no longer God's people, which means that God doesn't have a plan for them before the end. And with that being said, God's plan itself is incoherent because he had a plan at one point, but that's been done away with, and now he has another plan. And then, so as you can see, dispensationalism is full of holes. So I'm not going to be teaching dispensationalism. We're not going to be talking about different epochs and ages, different things. No, we're not going to do that, okay? We're just going to follow the Bible. We're just going to study there. And there's going to be some things that we're going to maybe not fully understand. That's totally fine, which takes us to the last thing I want to say. Look, it's okay to struggle through this study. It's okay to struggle through this book. It's totally fine. But as we struggle, remember a few things. First off, remember that we will know when it happens. Don't get too irritated about, trying to figure things out. I know everybody has their own, chart about they've got it all figured out. Don't get too upset. You'll know when it happens. And when we're in heaven, we can argue about it then. We can say, hey, it turns out you were wrong, and we can have a good old laugh, But, don't let yourself lose sleep over it. The second thing about this whole stumbling your way through it, remember that salvation is not based off of your perfect knowledge. If you do not fully and perfectly understand the end times, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. Jesus isn't sitting there and he's like, we got another stupid person here. They are not making it to heaven. God's not like that, So this isn't something you need to really be concerned about. It's something that God gave us for our benefit, not for us to question whether we're saved or not. I mean, I've actually heard a lot of, and I really want to spend some time on this because I've heard a lot of times where Christians actively attack other Christians and like they're not saved if they don't agree with them about these different end times issues, and that's definitely not where we want to be at. We want to be together on things. We want to be supportive of each other. We want to be seeking the Lord together, and we want to try to understand these things to the best of our ability, with humility, knowing that we're not going to fully understand. And then the other thing is, don't be consumed with end times puzzles. Oh, you can really fall down the rabbit hole, guys. There's a lot of stuff out there. Use it to grow, use it to learn, but don't let these puzzles just lead you down the rabbit hole. Before we close out, as we get into the study and the actual bit of the study, this is all introductory stuff, okay? But as we go through the study in the coming weeks, there's a few things that you have to be aware of. The first is that we don't have an agenda to get across. What that means is if we do not make it through all of the things that we have set up for that night to make it through, we'll just stop. Not a big deal. I'm not going to keep you out here till 8:30, 9 o'clock, okay? The second thing is we are going to try to include group discussions throughout the weeks. If you do not feel comfortable answering any of the questions, that's totally fine, but I want to include it just to get other people's opinions on stuff and give people a chance to talk, all right? So we'll kick this off with just a very simple question. Have you ever done a study of Revelation, and if so, what stuck out to you in that study? Oh, Spencer, you're ready to go. Go ahead.
What really stuck out to me is how he could just open up them seals and all this
Now, was this from a study that you did, or were you just reading it? Oh, okay. Okay. So did you ever do like one of those study long things where like you read the workbook along with the Bible? Okay. Sure. And have you ever done like a group study as far as where it has questions with it? Like with the question and answer kind of situation, videos that you watched about it? Okay. All right, that's fine. Just wanted to ask. Did anybody do something like that and something stuck out to you from that? Go ahead.
And the first study I done, the man was very politics with it, and it was very boring going through it. And when it was online that I was going through it, but there's another one, Joanne and Benny lived in Arizona, and their preacher was doing it. And she said, "I think you'll be able to understand him." So I got online and watched him, and he was easy to understand.
Good.
But that other guy,
So this guy that made it easy to understand, did anything really stick out to you about the book itself, or about understanding any of the book?
not really. It's just the whole thing was easier to understand with him.
Now, just a note for myself, what made it easier for you to understand? Because that's what the goal is of what we're doing here.
Because he was down to people's level, not the college.
Okay, so you're talking about like he didn't use
Normal, not no normal people. We're all normal. Never mind on that, okay?
We already got it on the party.
Anyway, he was easier to understand.
Sure. Are you talking about the word choice that he used? Like, are you talking about the words that he used?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anybody else did a study or watch videos about Revelation or any kind of a group discussion with questions and answers, anything like that where something stuck out to you about Revelation? No? Well, then there's not going to be much competition. I was hoping to kind of see what some of you guys' background was with the book. You guys have never been in a church where they like preach through the book of Revelation or anything? Oh, okay. So nothing really stuck out. Okay, that's fine. Brenda, were you going to say something? Okay. Did anything stick out to you? Not really. Okay. All right. Nothing wrong with that. Would it help you guys if I try to maybe print out a sheet of what we're going over beforehand? Would you like me to do that? Maybe. I'll do that from now. When I'm done with the lesson, I'll just have a sheet, so then you can focus on making notes instead of on trying to get everything from the PowerPoint. Okay, so just to summarize then what we looked at tonight, and if something pops out in your head about that question, just let me know later. But if I guess we could summarize what we looked at tonight as Revelation points the church forward. That's what it's doing. That's what we're trying to do. So we're going to go through it and just see what it has to say to us today. Are there any questions about anything we talked about tonight? No? Okay. So then next week what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at Revelation chapter 1. And we'll go, like I say, we're just going to go in by sections, not by verses. So we'll just see how far we get. And that's just going to be kind of the how we do things through this. If there are any times when I say something that's not clear, that's confusing, anything like that, make sure to write it, because we do have the question box down there, and you can just say, "Hey, I didn't understand this and this and this," and we can look at those questions at the beginning of the lesson before we even go any further.